It seems that the real motivating factor in this war is it's not a geographical or political dispute or a conflict that presumes two sides are fighting as moral equals, but rather an ideological one in which Israel is fighting regimes that are genocidal, that wish to see its destruction because it's a Jewish state.
As the war continues in Israel, going way past the 600 days, we seem to be enduring what's called fatigue. People are beginning to forget of what the war is all about, who started the war, how did we get to where we are today, and what did Israel have to do to be able to protect itself. And all of a sudden, the narrative changes. Listen to this interview. We all now know what Candace is all about, what she stands for. But listen to the conversation. When you listen to the right to the left, and you realize how corrupt, how deceitful, and how fake news gets generated. And it seems to be suffering from amnesia. People forget. They forget who attacked who on October 7. They forget about the atrocities, the savagery, everything that occurred on October 7. And they're just screaming about the babies that are dying in Gaza. What about the babies that died on October 7? And any babies that died in Gaza is because of Hamas. I think this conversation would keep your blood boiling as it did mine.
Has been equal, overboard, and also what would you say is an equal and overboard response?
Well, first of all, Dave, I'll just say, I know you wanted to debate Douglas Murray, but here you have him. It's the next best thing, okay? Everything Dave said is utter nonsense from the get-go. People of your ilk. But anyway, this is what happens when you get two comedians on to talk serious. Well, yes, for you, maybe. Anyway, I'm a huge Douglas Murray fan, and I think he did an awesome job. But for the record, I'll just say this. A couple of things just to what Dave said, and then I'll address your question, Candace, because I think, Dave, would you concede that this, you don't like the word war, I don't like the word conflict, because I think there's a fundamental flaw in presuming that Israel and its enemies are, and I'm using this word carefully, moral equals in the sense in terms of the values that Israel tries to uphold, the state it tries to create, which confuses me about your position in the sense that you're someone who's always fighting for individual rights and sovereignty, and that these governments, the whole purpose of government in and of itself is to protect those rights to the best of its ability. That's what its primary function is, and to the extent, to the degree to which Israel does that better than any other area in the region, I would think that at least morally, sympathetically, your solidarity, or whatever you want to call it, your advocacy, your opinion on this would lie more so with what Israel has to go through, because it's fighting regimes that do not share any of those values at all. Any of our values that are here today in terms of tolerance, individual rights, these kinds of things that Israel, although it's imperfect, is a Western democracy. So it always shocks me when I see people who are principled in your position not see that or side with that. And I know you haven't fully condemned Israel fully, but and I've seen other interviews where you do defend what Israel's, the virtues of Israel. But at the same time, I always find that very surprising, because the values that you uphold and say are fighting for on behalf of the Palestinians, it doesn't seem to me that they're regimes that represent them, and a lot of people in those populations don't uphold those values themselves or those desires themselves. So seeing it through a Western American lens, there's a hierarchy of values here, and it seems that the real motivating factor in this war is it's not a geographical or political dispute or a conflict that presumes two sides are fighting as moral equals, but rather an ideological one in which Israel is fighting regimes that are genocidal, that wish to see its destruction because it's a Jewish state, because of not just it as a Jewish state, but Jews worldwide. And they've been very explicit about that. So it confuses me that we impose this idea that everybody just wants the same thing and we have to just work this out, as a geographical dispute with all of that messy history. What's always seemed to me been animating this before any occupation of any territory even existed was a deep-seated hatred for Jews, the Jewish people, and the Jewish state. So even if people critical of Israel aren't anti-Jewish, the people Israel's directly fighting certainly are.
Okay, that is interesting. So I only want to say that because I did have, and I'm interjecting here, I did have a conversation with someone who's parents were forced out in, I want to say 1945. Is that the correct year?
48? Yeah.
And it definitely, I don't think every person that has an issue with Israel is being guided necessarily by this idea that it's just Jewish people. I mean, some of these people were actually living there and had accepted Jewish refugees into their home. One Palestinian is coming to mind, Mohammed Hadid, who they were allowing these refugees to live there for 2 years. They went out one day, came back, and the locks were changed. And they said, this is, again, I'm telling you what Mohammed Hadid told me, you're not allowed to come back here. Your home is being taken over. If you come back, they will shoot you and kill you. So I think some people are being motivated by what they perceive to be the historical injustice. Do you think that that's a fair assessment to say that some people aren't just looking at this as these are the Jews, or looking at this as these are people who took our homeland and it's not fair? Or do you think that it's changed over the years?
I think what's always fundamentally, not like there are marginal issues and there are fundamental issues, and I'm not denying that innocent Palestinians suffered as a result of all this. And I think, you could play a suffering Olympics all day long and keep going back and keep playing this game all day over atrocities that have been committed across the board throughout history. That's not unique to the foundations and formings of any state. But I think that as far as what's fundamental here is not that there's this thirst and desire to create a Palestinian state, but rather to destroy the Jewish one.
Dave?
Okay, let me address a bunch of that stuff. So I think, look, when you say, okay, so like I'm a libertarian and I believe in freedom, and government should, if it exists at all, only be there to protect property and natural rights. So look, if you were to say, like, let's compare the United States of America to Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which society would I rather live in? Which society do I think is more moral? Which government, was less oppressive? Okay, obviously the answer is the United States of America, or at least to its own people. We're probably a lot more oppressive to other countries, but that's totally irrelevant to whether I'd have solidarity with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. The question is, who's right in this conflict? Were you justified in invading and destroying and killing 1 million people there? And the answer is no. And so it doesn't matter. Like, that, it's just totally irrelevant to the conflict. Now, it's not irrelevant to how you feel about the country as a whole. But if you're talking about the war in Iraq, I'm not going to go like, well, George W. Bush is not as brutal as Saddam Hussein, therefore I have some solidarity with him. It's like, no, he's destroying a nation of people. He has no right to do this. And by the way, he's also greatly degrading my country. Now, as far as the rest of your characterization of Israel, I think it's totally unfair and not in line with the history. And it's kind of circular reasoning. Like, you're like, well, but don't you... Israel's the good guy, so how come you don't support the good guy? Wouldn't you be more sympathetic to them because they're the good guy? It's like, well, no, but look, Israel is not a Western democracy. They're just not. And they don't get to play this card anymore. Israel took control of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967. They haven't occupied them for a few months after a war or even a few years after the war. They've occupied them for nearly 60 years, for longer than the Soviet Union occupied all of Eastern Europe. And none of the people in those territories have any voting rights whatsoever. So how can you call yourself a democracy? By the way, I'm not that into democracy.
I understand.
I don't really care about voting rights. My beef is that they have no natural rights whatsoever. But you don't get to just hold 5 million people captive for nearly 60 years with no voting rights and claim to be a democracy. That's an apartheid regime. And so I don't, listen, the fact is, and many, just to your other point, because there were a few there. Sure. Many Israelis at the highest level of government have admitted this for many, many years, from Moshe Dayan to Barak, all up and down. Bunch of former prime ministers who admitted. It was Ehud Barak who said, if I was a young Palestinian, I'd be a terrorist too. And it's not because they are just all possessed by evil and Jew hatred. The truth is that the creation of Israel, however you feel about it, involved 750,000 Palestinians being kicked off of their land. And then after 1967, they've been occupied by a foreign military ever since. It is the most human thing in the world that you would develop hatred for the people who did that to you. There is no group of people anywhere, including the three of us, who would not develop a burning hatred for the foreign military that is policing your streets, kidnapping your people whenever they feel like it, killing your people with zero consequences. I mean, you know, imagine this government. Look, the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, which is he is the longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel, was founded by who? Menachem Begin, a literal terrorist. That's what Israel did with their terrorists. They elected them prime minister. Who wouldn't? How could you possibly live in Gaza or the West Bank and not hate Israel?
Okay. Can I respond?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So there's a lot there. I mean, appreciate we're letting each other go for a little while because I appreciate your perspective. But you mentioned the word invasion. And if we bring it to here and now and we talk about what happened on October 7th, because we are talking about this current military campaign, just to kind of hone in on specific points in history for a minute, because we can deliberate all of the history that you mentioned and alluded to, and it can take up 3 hours. But if we're just talking about here and now, right now, and trying to solve these problems, on October 7th, who invaded who? And did they invade occupied territory, or did they invade sovereign kibbutzim of individuals and deliberately target their civilians because they were Jews? Let's remember the terrorists that called his parents on October 7th, and they have an audio recording of it, saying, Mommy, Daddy. He didn't say, I got our house back. I got our property back. Guess what? I liberated Palestine. He said, Mom, Dad, I killed 10 Jews with my bare hands. And they scream in pride and elation. They took Israeli babies that are still being held hostage today. The reason they're doing it because they're animated by Jew hatred. And I think to be naive to that is incredibly dangerous. And it misses the entire motivation behind what Israel's facing. This occupation of these places that you mentioned. First of all, Israel leaving Gaza in 2005, 2006, leaving it to every effort, in other words, for Israel to give land back and minimize what you call the occupation, which I think is a false term, and we can talk about that, because occupation refers to one sovereign nation illegally occupying an existing sovereign nation, of which there was no such thing when it came to Palestine. I know the geography was called Palestine, and I say that just as a point of preference to say that a lot of the language in this conversation is deceptive. It's not just a propagandistic talking point, but I think saying terms like that gives people this false narrative impression that a sovereign state of Palestine that was independent and had its own leadership and its own independence was usurped by Israel in what you alluded to today, leaving out what actually happened in the formation of Israel, in that the refugee crisis was largely caused by the fact that a lot of the Arab nations did not want the creation of a Jewish state and sought to destroy it upon its formation. And so we can't just start the story in the middle. So fundamentally, you can say it's the occupation that's leading to all this terrorism. And I know you're not excusing the actions of the terrorists, as some people have tried to throw your way. I'm not saying you're saying that, but you're saying that there's a context here. And I would say, yeah, it didn't start on October 7th, but it didn't start in 67 or 48 either. There were massacres of Jews in the 20s in Hebron. There were massacres and tensions between these two people and hatred going on in the Islamic world going back to the beginning. If you go to protests today and you hear chants in Arabic, they're not saying two states side by side, liberation for the West Bank for a free state of Palestine alongside Israel. They're saying Khaybar Yar Yahud. And what is that reference to? Khaybar Yar Yahud? The Battle of Khaybar, in which Muhammad came across the Jews and he gave them a choice: convert to Islam or submit and become dhimmis and second-class citizens. And this is what's animated the entire region and the expulsion of Jews throughout all of the Arab countries in the Arab world. And so the need for a sense of Jewish safety in the region, I think, is super important and not to be discounted. And my fundamental point is that I do not think it's occupation that leads to terrorism. It's terrorism that leads to occupation. In other words, the only reason these things perpetuate is because Israel is continually attacked. And if you want the solution to stop, you have to have goodwill on the Palestinian side to commit to not wanting to kill the Jews in Israel and attack them. And I think leaving Gaza in 2005 was a perfect example of that. What did happen? I know you've heard these points before, Dave, that greenhouses and infrastructure were left there. Hamas takes over, kills their political opponents, fellow Muslims, Fatah, and establishes a terrorist statelet using all the international aid and funding to fire rockets and attack at Israel, invade Israel on October 7th, breaking a ceasefire. So accountability, I'm not denying suffering of what you're talking about for local populations, but Who's accountable for that? And at a certain point, you can't say Israel is.
Do you believe that?
This is so true. When you say the words of Gaza, giving back Gaza in 2005, we didn't give it back, we gave it away. We worked hard to develop it, to build it up into a thriving industry. We were forced to give it away by claiming that give them their sovereignty and they will thrive. We gave them Gaza. They had a chance and opportunity to turn that into their own state. What did they do with it? They turned it into a state of terror. They terrorized the citizens. They terrorized the country and turned it into a huge terrorist camp that launched thousands and thousands of rockets into Israel and then eventually set the stage for October 7. The world cannot be deceived by false narratives. We have to remember this is war. When you start up and you attack Israel, what do you expect? Israel not to retaliate? Israel not to try to get back its 250 hostages that he took? What did the world expect? To Israel just to sit back? And now England, France, they're all calling on Israel to just disproportionate. What is disproportionate? If this were to happen to you in your country, would you also say disproportionate power? And calling out for a Palestinian state? Really? Is that how you're going to reward October 7 terrorism? I hope the world wakes up and realizes and is able to differentiate between real news and fake news and know the real narrative. The real narrative is that Israel belongs to the Jewish people. God gave it to us as a gift. We have a title for it. Open up the Bible. It's right there. That's our signed, recorded title, that Israel belongs to us. All that Israel wants is to live in peace. Give us strong borders. Let us protect our citizens. And you guys want to knock yourself out in your own countries and kill each other as you have been doing for centuries? Knock yourself out. But keep us out of it. Live and let live. Let us secure our borders. It is so clear that they don't want Israel. They're not interested in Israel. They're not interested in the homeland. They're interested in annihilating Israel. It's so clear. It's so clear. All they want is to destroy the Jewish people. The world has to know that, to understand that. This is not a real estate conflict. This is not a war about boundaries. This is a war about annihilation. And they have declared it. Iran has declared it. And Hamas has declared it. That they're going to repeat October 7 again and again and again. When you hear a neighbor saying that, what would you do? Just sit back and roll over? No. Been there, done that for 77 years. Now it's time just to clean up and secure our borders so that we can continue on being a light unto the nations. God bless you. God loves you.